Hey everybody, it's Eric Balance coming to you with the Resilient Minds podcast, where I feature beautiful entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and experts in their field, where they help us discover their X factor, their experience of life, only to discover how they were able to accomplish and find out their why factor, their big why, their purpose in life. So join me as we get to discover the beauty of our minds and how can we really continue to go after the biggest and most wildest dreams while we continue to pursue and manifest our greatest intelligence that comes from the heart. See you on the show. Welcome everybody to the Resilient Minds podcast. You guys, I'm pumped. Today we have a dear friend. I got to spend time with him, now a few times we've gotten to connect. It's been amazing to just get to know him. Marc Champagne, welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks for having me, man. I feel privileged as well, just to spend so much time with you over the last, 2 weeks, really.
Yeah.
I'll have to keep this going. We'll just have to keep booking interviews, essentially.
100%. Let's just keep chatting, bro. So for those of you that don't know Marc, he's an author of a best-selling book called Personal Socrates, Better Questions, Better Life, and host of one of the top 50 ranked podcasts, Behind the Human, which I was very grateful to have been on. This was really a special time. So Marc spent over a decade studying the mental fitness practices of some of the world's most successful and brilliant thinkers. He specializes in training teams, integrating tailored mental fitness practices designed to help them clear out mental clutter so they can really overcome overwhelm, calmly navigating, high stress situations and really enhancing creativity, clarity, and focus. So make sure you check him out. www.behindthehuman.com. I'm excited, bro. Let's dive in.
Yeah. Let's do it.
Brother. So, on the Resilient Minds podcast, every time I start this show, we really get into, I always share is it's always been about our experience in life and how it's contributed to our big why. And so I always say, there's defining moments that really help us discover who we are, how we cultivate what we do, and why we set those new intentions into our realities or how we want to show up. So take us back, man. Take us back to this experience of your life and take us back to maybe some of those defining moments that really put you on this progressive path of possibility and defining your purpose and setting into that new paradigm in deep focus, please.
Yeah, I love that question and the perspective behind it. As you can probably guess, there are a few defining moments, at least on my path. But the one that really, I would say, took me from a place of being curious and experimenting and knowing that I was interested in a certain topic, and that topic being mental fitness and the practices around them, to actually living my why and being forced into, in a good way, forced into, I guess, the sentiment of, I have to do this. Like, I have to make mental fitness accessible to as many humans as possible. And the moment that created that, and that didn't happen right in the heat of the moment, because it was probably one of the most challenging times of my life, was when I was sitting in front of this Apple dashboard looking at the app metrics of at the time, one of the first guided journaling apps on the market. And I was looking at this screen, and I was particularly interested in this one massive number, and it was the App Store impressions, that the number of people we had reached, essentially, and 86.9 million people. I'll never forget that number, because then the next step was to hit delete from App Store because the business actually wasn't working. And that threw me into a negative loop and just essentially stripped me away of all the hope and past motivation of helping people with this app and these practices. It within a click of a mouse or tap of a touchpad, it was all gone. And that's when I really had to lean on and kind of practice what I preach with all the mental fitness, because I could feel myself going into this deep depression, because it wasn't just deleting or shutting down a business. It was at least at that time, the way that I was looking at it was deleting essentially my identity for the last 4 years. And when I was able to come out of that, thankfully, because of questions and the mental fitness practices and whatnot, that's when it became so clear that, well, if one question in that moment could take me out and pause the narrative long enough to put me back onto a track and start to regain hope and have a plan start to surface and whatnot, then I mean, that obviously could happen for other people. And then you realizing, oh, there's these simple tools. And, for me, journaling is one of them, but there's a million others as well. Really anything to train your mind to essentially work for you instead of against you. I'm like, why don't we have access to this stuff? I'm not inventing these practices. They've been around since the beginning of time. And that's when it all started to click around the purpose and why, at least I feel, why I'm here on this physical planet or physical world, and that is just to combine story and narrative and interesting conversations with people and the study of people with the practices, so people can be like, okay, I can see, I can use that, like I get that now, like now I understand how that can integrate into my life. And I think that is through conversations like this and film and other podcasts and whatnot that make it accessible for people. So that was the big moment that really launched me into a different feeling behind the work.
Beautiful. So this is something that I'd love to touch on, is based off of, you said, feeling versus thinking. And like uh I think so many times in expressions, we're so conditioned, especially around, society's expectations, to just constantly think that we need to do, or that it needs to be done, and we don't believe our feelings.
Yeah.
So we're so emotionally disconnected from ourselves that we allow the thoughts of our mind almost dictate that they're not true. So like it's interesting to me because, for such a long period of time, I know for myself, I used to think that I am my thoughts, right? So my thoughts told me that I'm being a dumbass, I'm being a dumbass, you know what I mean? Or if my thoughts tell me that my intuition is like steering me the wrong way, oh, that's just that, you shouldn't listen to that. That's not true. That's just like, why would that even be like a reality?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I know that, I mean, there's 90% of people that think that way or that believe in that capacity, where they're just like really not trusting in that intuitive internal behavior. So going back to feeling, why was it that you got curious about it?
Well, in that moment, I had no choice because I knew I had worked previously in the corporate space in mental health, in the pharmaceutical world of all places, because I feel like I couldn't be farther from that industry at this point, specifically working on preventative health and mental fitness. But because of that, I knew the signs because I was working in spaces like depression and anxiety and bipolar and stuff like that. So I knew where the journey was going to end, and it wasn't looking very good. And at that time, my first son, he would have been 2 years old. And it was him that kept coming up in my mind. Like, can he feel the stress that is in the household as much as me and, my wife, we're doing everything to shield him from that. Like, they pick up on these things. Like they're like full on energetic mirrors. Right. And it was that I'm like, there has to be another path. There's got to be something to pull me out of this. And that's when I had made the decision to just email someone that I respected quite a bit. And I had interviewed a couple times, a gentleman by the name of Chip Conley. And it just provided some feedback, because he was also he was mentoring the founders from Airbnb and whatnot. And it was just someone that I knew he would answer the email, even though he was a busy guy and kind of a high profile individual. And he did. I said, Chip, here's what's going on. I feel lost. It's the first time in my life where I don't feel like I actually have a plan forward since probably university. Because I knew now at that moment that would, like, mental fitness in the world that I'm working in right now, like that was the place that I meant to be. But I just shut down the company that was keeping me in there. And my backup plan of going back to the industry I'd left 100% didn't feel aligned anymore. So that's where the hope was stripped away. I'm like, what do I do? And he just replied back with a simple one-line question. And this changed everything for me, because he said, Mark, what do you want for your life? And I remember reading that and thinking, well, isn't this ironic? Like, I've become known as the guy with all the questions, given the app and in the world that, I was working in. And here I am faced with a question that has just paused all of those negative looping thoughts and all of the thoughts of depression and hopelessness, just long enough, because they come back, of course, but just long enough in that moment to think, okay, well, if this is what I want for my life, then who can I speak to inch forward? What's a small version of a plan moving forward daily to get closer and closer to that life and that feeling, day in and day out. And that's where the whole premise behind, and I have this on the back of my book, that it doesn't matter who we are, where we're at, what's going on in our lives, we're all one question away from a completely different life, or less grandiose, one question away from a different mood or mental state if you start looping in some gratitude prompts. And it wasn't in that exact moment where I thought, okay, I need to make this my mission and teach this principle and do everything I can to get this out there. I was in, well, I need to get myself, sorted out and get back on track. So then it was just, okay, what do I know? I've interviewed at that time at least 200 plus people. I know they're not sitting back asking all the why me questions. They're asking questions that are moving them forward, right? And they're doing everything possible to keep their mind in a thriving state. So that was my job. I remember we were living in Toronto, Canada at that point, probably one of the most expensive cities in Canada. Could no longer afford where we were living. We're living in an area that was always meant to be temporary because of what was going on with the business. We're like, oh, well, once we hit this milestone, then, we'll stabilize a little bit more and we'll move to this neighborhood. Well, obviously that wasn't happening. So now we're in a place that we don't even like and we can't afford it. And, things just don't feel great. So the only thing I kept as an expense was my gym membership to the local YMCA. And it was, the physical movement and the exercise. But I would say the biggest thing was, and the particular reason why I wanted to keep this membership, was they had a sauna or steam room in that gym. And that steam room is what really got me back, because that was the moment where I'd sit in there for 10 or 15 minutes before going back to the co-working space I was working out of at that time, that I would clear out the mind and set the intentions, do some visualizations, go back to that big question of what I want, and just start the day without the depressive thoughts and with some motivation and some excitement, and just rinse and repeat. And then throughout the day, okay, as soon as they come back up, pause, I'm taking a walk, 15-minute walk around the block, clear the mind, or, do some journaling or do a round of breath work. It was weird because, we're not conditioned to do that. It feels, doesn't feel productive, right, in the society that we live in. But what's not productive is when your mind is hijacked all day and you can't think clearly and you're thinking in survival mode. I mean, you're not producing anything of great substance in those mental states. So that, until it got to the point where it felt, okay, I think I've got a handle on this. And still to this day, I mean, I'm human like the rest of us, there's good days and bad days, but just having that toolkit is so reassuring to know that I don't have to sit in this mental torture for longer than what's required. And that's what I want to, that's the mission behind, doing, these interviews with people like yourself and working with teams, that we don't have to sit in that. and nothing against 7-day silent retreats or anything like that. I mean, those are all fantastic, but everything that I'm talking about takes minutes, and you can integrate and do them right now. And that's the part that, I feel, and I know you support all this work as well, knowing, your background, but that's the part that excites me, because I think we're not decades, but years away from these kind of practices and mental fitness principles being as integrated as physical fitness is, and as normal as like, yeah, I'll meet you, but I'm just going to go for a run first. We're getting there. And I think if we can get there faster collectively and help the movement advance a little bit more faster, we can really flip the mind and this mental health crisis that, is plaguing the entire world, essentially.
How do you think we can start integrating more of this inside of organizational culture and educating that as a collective, as individuals, as maybe somebody that's listening and saying, hey, like, this is not, available in my community or in my office, what can they do to, maybe you could do two things. Is one, like, share a practice of what they can do for themselves, but then what can they do to ask that better question, that one question, to change
Yeah.
the narrative in the office?
Well, what I see work best in an office situation is, I mean, you first have to come in and introduce what this is all about, of course, and because it's just a lot of people just have no idea, like, what is mental fitness, and what does that include? And to me, the definition is quite broad. It's just really anything that you're doing to train your mind to work for you instead of against you can fall under that category, which then is the umbrella term, and it includes your mental health, your mental performance, mental resiliency, your optimization, like everything. It's like physical exercise. There's a million different exercises that you can do, but they all somewhat move the body, right? And help with your overall health and well-being. So there has to be some sort of introduction to like what this is and what's possible, which many companies do something like this. But where things fall off the rails, and where I think there's a great opportunity to actually move the movement forward, I guess you can say, is for companies to then look at where can we integrate this kind of work within our regular meetings and systems. If you have a weekly huddle, include it there. 10 minutes. Let's just take, not even 10 minutes. We can do it in 3 minutes. Let's say you do a 30-minute huddle with your team every week. First 3 minutes, one word. How's everyone feeling? Where do you feel that in your body? And it actually works really well virtually as well, as you see the chat starting to load up. Typically what I see is, I feel stressed, overwhelmed, nervous, anxious. Okay, we're acknowledging this. Where do you feel in your body? And this with your work as well. Often we just even acknowledge where it is. It releases that feeling. But here's the big kicker, is that whether we ask that question or not, those emotions are coming into the day with us, and they affect everything, right? They affect how we show up, our energy, all of it. So I'd rather take a few seconds, literally, to just acknowledge, okay, I'm feeling a little off. And if it's, I feel, tightness in my chest, well, what's the fuel source? And can I cut that off? Now all of a sudden we have some data and some insight. We can release that. And that takes just minutes. And then now as a business, and as your day and your team is moving forward, now you're thinking more clearly, and you're starting, that huddle or whatever is about to come next with a primed mind, versus being in that like reaction mode and just trying to survive the day. And that's one question, one word. The next thing could just be, how do you want to show up today for yourself and for your team? And you can layer in, even, I do this for all of the activations, 2-3 minutes of guided breath work. Just reminding people that, we all have access to our breath at any moment. It's the thing that literally keeps us alive, but we forget about all the time, right? And we often, you're hunched over your computer and you're slowly kind of contracting, and well, wait, just open up. Everyone listening now, just take one big deep breath, right? Like, that immediately slowed me down, because you've got me all energized about the topic. So I'm speaking quickly and whatnot. But imagine you start your meetings like that, and you've slowed down, and imagine, your team members are coming in from another meeting. You don't know what went on over there, or what they're dealing with personally, and literally one breath can just kind of level set everyone's minds. And then you have an interaction with the team, or an ideation session, or review the strategy from that state. I mean, that's the superpower. And it's like 5 minutes, right? But those 5 minutes literally can dictate the next 23 hours of the day, including how well you sleep or not. So it's just the small things like that. And of course, there's a bunch else that you can do. But once it gets complicated, or it's like, oh, we need to carve out an hour of the day and replace something in the schedule or the agenda if there's a big offsite meeting, then all of a sudden it becomes, it's like a barrier, versus let's start small and see where we can make some little tweaks. And then also realize, well, and this is where I'm a little bit bold with business leaders, because the reality of the situation, as soon as a mind stops working, so does the brand and the company. Or if a mind is working at 50%, so is the brand and the company. So it's kind of in our best interests as an organization, and I think just as a good human, that your team feels good and that their minds are working well, right? It's just the ripple effect of that is exponential across everything.
I love it. And I think that this is where those relationships moves the company forward as a shared purpose.
Yes, exactly. And I think the only other thing I didn't say, and I think this is the other big gap, is because, again, like, none of this stuff, this is not earth shattering, practices. I'm not inventing questions. I'm not inventing these practices. But the key is, like in any kind of sales, people get this in sales all the time. You have to speak the language of the company. And this is selfishly why I keep Behind the Human running, and why there's always a very diverse group of guests, because, Google or LinkedIn or another company may resonate with the Olympian, and another company may resonate with the Michelin star chef, or the developer, or the designer, or the writer. And it's finding those entry points in conversation that then open the door to, okay, so what are we talking about here? And now I'm interested because I understand their perspective, versus just coming in and saying, hey, here's what you need to do. And if you do these things, it's going to work, which it probably will, but you don't have people engaged in that kind of strategy.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly in this. I think that there's an element of identifying a culture to before, and appreciating that map of the world before we can ever actually navigate within it.
Yeah, totally.
There's tremendous wisdom in that, and it's interesting. Like Dr. David Hawkins talks about, the spiral dynamics, and as you get to go up the spiral dynamics, you start to then be able to navigate all of the maps of the world, as long as you're willing to kind of be sensitive enough to them. Anyways.
Yes. Yeah, and if you think of it too, like, just going back to story, like, if you think back to ancestral tribes and how we kind of all evolved, I mean, it all was through passing down wisdom through story and narratives. If you think of any religion, it's all stories and fables and this and that, and that's how you passed along. And somehow we've, especially I would say definitely in North America, we've lost that wisdom transfer in a way.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that same level of respect for our elders, or modern elders, as Chip Conley would call them. And that's having a big effect, I think, in culture and society, right across the board.
I love this. This actually, it takes me to this curiosity of your book, right? Because personal Socrates, of course, after such a legendary philosopher. And I'm curious to know, like, what inspired or empowered you to really step through that, and take that, that man's, identity, and really bring it into this personal expression that is you, and also express it in such a beautiful way in your own words.
Well, I mean, thank you for those beautiful words and kind words. It's interesting because the idea didn't come from me. Actually, it came from the gentleman running the publishing company that ended up publishing the book, and a dear friend. And it was after I was speaking to him about the book concept, and I was speaking to him about the book concept, but then I was also just speaking about the impact that questions have had on my life. And I shared the one story from the question that really pivoted everything after the app crashed. But even before that, what stimulated the idea for a journaling app that was guided by questions was a decade of me manually or physically journaling pen to paper through the questions of people that I was reading about through blogs. And we talked about this on your show. I mean, Tony Robbins was a huge source of that inspiration. And so I'd be reading his blog posts or his books, and Robin Sharma and Success Magazine at that time. And what quickly became so apparent was that all of these people were all asking really good quality reflective questions, personally and professionally. So I would write those down, and then I would journal on them in relation to wherever I was at in my life. And that was the whole catalyst behind starting the app. But then when I was explaining, and same thing with Behind the Human, I mean, I'm trying to pull the questions that have made the big difference in people's lives, right? So when I was explaining this to Joey about the book and how impactful this was, he's like, oh, well, it sounds like you're kind of taking these big questions, but then you're breaking them down into, smaller questions and step by step, more questions after that. And he's like, that's the Socratic method. It's like, the Socratic? I'm like, I've heard of the Socratic method, obviously, and I know of Socrates, but high level, like the majority of the world, because, unless you've gone to law school or you're, full on academic in philosophy, you kind of just hear about Socrates. And I was like, I don't know if that resonates. And then I think in that call too, he said, we should call this book Personal Socrates. And I'm like, absolutely not. I am not a philosopher. I don't want to be, looped into this like endless, phase of aggressive questioning. Like that was my perception until I let it sit a little bit and let the mind breathe. And then I started looking into Socrates, and the light bulbs kind of started turning off. So I was like, well, here's a guy that his method has literally been around since the beginning of time and is still being used in, very specific situations in law as well as academics. But we're all using the method as well, individually and collectively. We're just not really intentional about it because we're all asking questions. It's just, are we asking enough questions? Are they quality questions? And are they questions that are moving us past the surface and down into the core of whatever we're trying to solve for or figure out? And that's when I started to get curious. I said, well, obviously the method works. It's still around, but is there a way to modernize it through story and narrative and whatnot that anyone can really tap into this? And that's when it's like, okay, this is like having your own kind of personal Socrates coach sitting on your shoulders while you're navigating life. And why the book is made up of a bunch of different profiles of interesting humans, from people that are still alive today, like the James Clears of the world, to, Marcus Aurelius or Coco Chanel or Robin Williams, and looking at their stories and their lives and their work through the angle of, well, what questions can we ask ourselves to help, guide our path forward personally and professionally, leveraging their perception and their work and so forth. And that's kind of how it all came to be. And now this is hilarious, actually. So I just posted this right now, actually, or about an hour ago. I use Adobe Express for graphics, and they just integrated a bunch of AI for their images. And now I'm like playing with Socrates. I'm like, create an image of Socrates reflecting in a modern forest or something like that. And I just posted it. I'm like, here's my pal Socrates. So now I feel like we're good buds, and
Nice.
somehow he's like infiltrated my life pretty on a consistent basis.
I love it because I really believe in the energy of we get that energy back, and it's like we've replayed our lives, and we keep replaying our lives in different ways, just kind of moving through different uh, timelines.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I love it, and I think it's so fitting because as you know, we're working on the platform Zeno, and Zeno of Cyprus was the one that really curated the stoicism. And
Yeah.
so this is something that it's really fascinating, as we continue to cultivate education and business and language and foresight. uh, we take the time to really come together in this time and in this space to then say, okay, how can we actually merge these levels of awareness so that we can continue to help and educate and empower and entertain the philosophy of mental wellness, mental fitness, mental
Yeah.
understanding.
Well, the thing is with all of this, especially questions, like a question on itself is of course powerful, but a question paired up with perspective from, like what you're saying with different philosophers and Stoics and whatnot, just give us the opportunity for perspective shift. Like I'm
Mhm.
still thinking about the point that you left when I interviewed you, and this whole idea and flipping, the question of how can I do this for my future self? Or what would my future self want in this moment? That changes everything. You can just be stuck in a situation and be so stuck in like the current moment and the granular details that you're paralyzed, right? Or not even worse, in my opinion, you're not paralyzed, but you're making decisions that are so short-sighted that because you're in that moment of that energy. But if you can just pause, which is what the question allows us to do, and zoom out, it doesn't take very long, right? And all of a sudden you start thinking, okay, what will my future self require in this situation? Now you're thinking at a whole other level. You're thinking at a wisdom and kind of sage level. And then you layer on, what would Socrates do? Or what would Tony Robbins do in this situation? Or if I bring it back to, a lot of the work that I do around just with podcasting, I think of my heroes like the Rich Rolls of the world. What would Rich Roll do in this situation? And then all of a sudden you're in a whole other world of decision making that doesn't feel scary, it feels motivating, and you're moving forward from a different perspective.
Solutions.
Solutions that take like minutes.
Yeah. And this is beautiful because if we're focused always on that solution, right, then there is absolutely, and we take more responsibility of the present,
Yeah.
then there is nothing in this world that can take us out of alignment.
No. It's
Because
powerful stuff.
everything becomes a window of opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. There's the perspective again. Just a subtle little shift, but it
Subtle.
has huge implications.
And where did this come from? Like this, you mentioned the app, like it fell short, or like take us a little bit into the app. I'm super curious about why it did the way it did.
Yeah.
What happened there in terms of business?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like it was really something beautiful. And then how did you navigate like what you're doing now into like through your tactics and the way that you're able to really cultivate this own self? But like, we always hear some of the greatest leaders out there, who were hundreds of millions of dollars in debt and were able to come back and create $1 billion and stuff like this. So what does that kind of look like, and how do we configure that? What does that like, this is, I don't know how
Yeah.
much in debt you were, but like at the end of the day, or if it even happened, but like it's same type of principle. So I'd love to get more curious about this.
Yeah. Well, you kind of touched on it earlier when you mentioned, and we kind of went off on another tangent. So I'm glad you brought this back. But you touched on this earlier around the idea of we have these societal pressures around
Yeah.
how you do business or how we show up and what we measure and track and all of that, and what dictates success and so forth. So briefly what essentially happened with the app is, yeah, we reached a lot of people, and the app was being featured around the world by Apple and all the different country stores. And then that was starting to, cascade into, media features and things like that. So we got real, I would say the whole team, and definitely myself, as the kind of outward facing ambassador for the product, and the one working on the partnerships and collaborations and whatnot, which is what really ended up, I think, driving those Apple features, because we did have reputable people and brands that were collaborating right out of the gate, the day one we launched. But what that also did was not even mask, because we knew there was a challenge. Obviously, in that world, you think of the Keo, which is the name of the app, just think of it in the same light as a Headspace or Calm, where you would pay for a subscription to premium content, essentially, or more app features. Like, that was our model as well. But what was not happening is we weren't converting all of those people coming in to paid subscribers. And there were a bunch of different reasons for that. The flow of the app was not as intuitive, because we had created it for me, essentially, to solve my challenge in that space, which we successfully did. But we waited too long to do user research to really understand, oh, okay, there's confusion here, we need to tighten this up. So there was a bunch of like very standard, if you were to look up app development or, startup, don't do this, do this kind of thing. Like that's where things failed. And I'm only sharing that because what made it worse was that we were still getting all of these features. So that's where there was a mask on what was actually happening. So, to simplify, the business model wasn't working. But then, like, well, yeah, but it's not working. We're working on that. But clearly we have something here, because, LinkedIn just did a big feature on the app, or we just, had a feature in this Calm magazine. So that just kept giving more motivation to keep going and just basically not make changes. And we needed to really just pause, forget all the public facing stuff that was happening, that was fueling the ego and fueling the excitement that, oh yeah, this obviously is going to work, and we just need to keep going. We need to pause and actually really revisit the whole business model, see and fix the app. So that was the challenge there. And what ultimately led to the shutdown of it was financially. I mean, we were way in over our heads at this point, just from development costs. And the biggest thing on my side was that I was starting to feel like a hypocrite, because here I am talking about all these well-being practices, mental fitness, and I feel max stressed financially and mentally, that I'm barely functioning properly. And how can I sit here and do, podcasts like this, or interviews with magazines, and speak of what you need to do for your mind when mine's about to explode? So that was the final straw. Like, there's that it doesn't feel right. And intuitively, I knew that this was just a product within a business that I would end up continuing in, which is what I'm doing now. But that was just one product, one part, or one chapter in the story. And I didn't have the solution at that time, but I knew that I was in the right work and something would materialize. And the contrast to the whole story was when I was working on the book, I made a promise to myself that I wasn't going to get wrapped up in the numbers, because I've been down that road. We reached a lot of people. Didn't mean anything if the business didn't work, right? So my whole focus, of course, I'll take bestseller lists and stuff like that, and set up the book to achieve that as best as I can. But the focus wasn't that. The focus was in this product launch, let's call it, very similar to the app. In this case, I just want to come in and do these kind of interviews present, so that I can actually see where the real opportunities are, based on being in conversation with really interesting humans, and then not get wrapped up on like, okay, we need to sell this amount of books to hit Wall Street Journal bestseller lists and stuff like that. No, I'm just going to give it my all. And the strategy was simple. I'll book myself on 100 podcasts and release them all around the publication date, which was advice I got from other authors that I had interviewed. And then I just added on I'm going to make sure my mental fitness is dialed in, and I'm going to enjoy this, because I'm only going to get this exact experience once. And there might be other books, there might be other product launches and services and stuff like that. And not even might, there have been, and there will continue to be, but I'll only get that first book launch once. So I'm not going to rob myself of the experience just because I'm hung up with these bestseller lists or other metrics. I'm just going to go in, enjoy it, be me, be as present as possible, and see where it goes. And, thankfully, the book did end up on some Amazon bestseller lists, which is fantastic. But who knows, like, the craziest stuff happens when you just put it out there. There's been so many interesting stories that it's just been, wow, like, that I wouldn't have imagined. I wouldn't have imagined that couples are picking up the book and reading it together, and then they'll read one chapter and then sit down and go and converse back and forth, to see, well, how would you have answered this? And I said, wow, I mean, I didn't think of that. That's not how the book was designed, or at least wasn't the use case that I had for it. But that's interesting. So now I'm hearing this stuff. Well, maybe we can do something for couples, related to this. But I would have missed these things if I was just head down and just so damn focused on hitting bestseller lists and whatnot. Right. And also just miss the excitement of, that's super cool. Someone took concept and an idea that I had and morphed it into this whole other use case and are getting some sort of value from it. And that's great.
Yeah, it is great, especially, having you recognizing the fact that somebody will take I think this is something that we, like, in society, we've done over generations and generations, but we're just not, most of us don't pay attention to it. We repeat patterns, right? And some good, some bad. And we really are just redefining or creating story. And, whether, where we think of the prophets, or we think of philosophers, or we think of kings, queens, it really is all, everyone's their own prophet, and everyone's their own leader, and it's just another story. It's just the way that you decide to kind of live that story. And so what I love is that, we always get to identify and step into that story and take more responsibility of that story when we do these with these, like, powerful principles and values that we define in the way that we show up.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is, like, you said something really profound in the way that I understand, is like, how can we continue to just really embody, like, these questions that, or the answers to, like, hey, how can we like take this narrative of what people are doing in a relationship to refine the relationship and ask each other these powerful questions? How can we start to really embody more of these unique values and principles that these questions do uncover?
Well, I think the easiest way to really integrate this kind of thinking and these kind of practices into your daily lives is to do everything possible to stay off of autopilot. Because when we come out of this container that we're here together to having this conversation, as soon as we go back into, like, the regular world and society, everything's kind of set up to not think. It's like, here's what you need to do, and it's almost like people are walking around just full on autopilot and just going through the days and rinse, repeat, and we then wonder why 10 years goes by and you're like, whoa, how did I get here? I don't feel at all aligned. I feel like I have no sense of purpose. And then we get into these big life explosions, right? Where there's always breadcrumbs being left. It's all there. We have all the answers to the questions that are floating around our heads. We just need to slow it down and take time to think. And I think that's the part, like, that's one of the superpowers that I see time and time again, whether I'm studying people that have long passed to present day humans, they've all found ways that work for them personally and that are tailored to their lives to take time to let their minds breathe and think and just, what am I really hearing here? Like what's coming up in the whispers? And those are the signs, and those are, and this relates back to the book example. Like those are the things to pull on the threads and be like, okay, that intuitively feels right. But you can't see that stuff when you're running to the next destination, right? And it's just there. And there are different ways. Everyone's different. Like I said, just like physical fitness, like if you don't like to run, that doesn't rule out all of exercise. So for me, journaling is, we're recording this on a Friday. Every Friday at 3 p.m., I take 20 minutes to ask 3 questions. What went well this week? What would I have done differently this week? And what can I celebrate this week? And it takes 15, 20 minutes, but the level of insight now all of a sudden, because the days go by fast, you forget half of the things that took place this week. So if you just take a few intentional minutes and zoom out, open up your calendar, see where you had meetings, see who you spoke to, there's so much insight and data in just that practice that it's nearly impossible not to grow and see, okay, well, there's these like time you spent in this area was a waste and I felt depleted. Okay, well, next week I'm going to if I have that set up again, I have the opportunity to adjust that now, right? I'm going to blow at that meeting, or I'm going to put in, especially in corporate teams, see this all the time. Like it felt like I was in just meetings back to back, nonstop. And it's, one meeting and then you flip into the other one. You have no time to think and digest that information. And then you wonder why we feel so clogged and overwhelmed. Okay, well, now you have an opportunity. Next week, put some blocks in between those meetings. Take a look at what you're really trying to accomplish. Again, personally or professionally, make sure it's in the calendar, and that you're prioritizing it. But that just doesn't happen if you just wake up on Monday and let others hijack your time and your energy, right? So it takes a bit of a downtime to just, all right, let's do a bit of an audit of where we're at, where I want to be. And then make sure that our habits and our systems and where we're putting our energy support that path versus push us farther and farther away. And I'm just always amazed because, and like I said earlier, it's the mission is just to make this stuff accessible, because that's not super complicated. It affects everything. Like I don't think I've ever canceled the Friday review. I might have moved it around throughout the day if something, was scheduled, but canceling it would just completely throw me off. I can't even imagine starting Monday having not gone through that reflection, because it would just feel like, okay, I'm starting the week purely on reaction mode versus on my terms in an intentional way. And then the more we do that, then what typically happens is the more we realize throughout the days, like your self-awareness starts to boost and you're training for that, right? It's just like an Olympic athlete training for an event. Like we're training for our minds to work for us. You start seeing the signs like, whoa, okay, I can see I'm getting, I'm being scheduled aggressively for, a Thursday of next week. Like pull it back a second. I know where that ends, because I just did the audit on the week before. I didn't feel good at the end of that day, right? Like this is where we can make the little moments, the little pivots and the shifts that make all the difference.
This is really beautiful, because this comes down to like a very self-leadership, self-management practices that are optimally used in teal organizations. And although most people don't even know what a teal organization is, so I'm curious to know, like, because these are the things, like, when we hear of Patagonia selling, right? That was a
Yeah.
teal organization, right?
Yeah.
Super self-managed, self-fulfilled, self-led, and this is something that we inherently have for billions of years. We've been self-manage. I mean, look,
Yeah.
we're constantly existing, right?
Yeah.
So what do you do with, corporate, where they can really, if anybody's on here and they're like, hey, how can I really bring Mark in? What can they do to kind of reach out to you? How can they connect with you? And yeah, just let us know, please.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I mean, for me, the big thing is that anyone that, if you're interested and you want to reach out, I'm making the assumption that you value the health of your mind as well as your teams. And I say that just because I'm not in the business of, if I was in physical, training people on the physical fitness side of things, like, my goal is not to sell you on the fact that exercise is healthy and good for you. So, we have to start there, that, our health, the health of our minds, I think, and I'm biased, of course, has to be number one. Because even when you think of physical fitness, it's our minds telling us whether we're going to pick that food up or not, or whether we're going to go to the gym or not, all of that stuff. So let's dial in the mind. And then after that, it's really just, what's the pulse of the team, the organization? What's, how realistic, if we really think about it, and maybe there might be some, one-on-one conversations or interviews or whatever, or you have some surveys that you've put out, like, where are people really at truly? Let's stop pretending what we don't know and just be honest with the situation and just deal with it, right? So I can say, statistically speaking, this is not me making it up. I mean, the majority of teams are stressed, to the max right now, overwhelmed. We came out of a wild time in history, and people are very much rocked by the level of uncertainty that, everyone has gone through and are continuing to go through, because policies and the way we work is just vastly different across so many different organizations. So there's an effect to that on our minds. We don't do well in uncertainty, because we typically don't have the tools to be comfortable in the uncertainty, right? So you can, without even really asking the team, you can probably make the assumption, statistically speaking, that the majority of the team are struggling with something. And even if they're not, I mean, when is it not a good idea to try to better the performance of your mind and how you feel? I mean, there's always something, never ends. That's the part of this kind of self-development work that I love, is that you do something and then you're exposed to another practice or tool or perspective. And it's the loop that continues to give. It's the infinity scroll that you want to be on, So I would just say, give it some thought in terms of where your team's at, and then to make it real and to make it sellable within the organization, take some time to think about where you are from a company perspective and where you want to be. We do this all the time with brand plans and strategies and whatnot. And then that's where, this is what I do at least, that's where we link the mental fitness and the teams with the business objectives. Because we'll set the same kind of plans and strategies for everyone individually in terms of where they're at and where they need to be. What kind of rest and recovery do you need integrated into the year, so that you can actually get to the end of the year and be celebrating the success and hitting your budget and hitting those milestones? It's no different than an NBA championship. You're not, the championship is won with the games, but the games are won with the practices. And in between the practices and the games, there's rest and recovery, right? But we don't do that when it comes to ourselves. It's like we run 16-hour high intensity workouts nonstop, back to back, with zero rest, and wonder why, we feel burnt out. Like, it's inevitable when you zoom out and look at that, right? So for businesses, let's take a honest look and see where people are at, what we want to achieve, and what we can do to support the team and the individuals to get there, and get there in a healthy way. It's possible. It's very much possible.
It's so possible, and it's so needed, especially right now. Bro, literally love your mind, bro. I really appreciate your
Thank you.
awareness and the way that you're able to so eloquently elaborate what our needs are, especially, you know, it's so important right now for people to have this awareness, or at least get curious about it. And so thank you. And one last question before we go is, if you had 3 days left to live, what would you be doing?
Oh, wow, that's a big question. Well, I think I would just, wherever I was at in the world and whoever I was around, I would just do everything as humanly possible to be present in that situation and really soak up those moments. And because I think that, like, if I think of all of the religions and philosophies and stuff like that, it all comes back to, like, the holy grail is just awareness and present in the moment. Because if you're in that moment, you're not stewing about the future and you're not reminiscing about the past. Like, you're there, and there's so much beauty everywhere around us. It's impossible to not feel great when you're really in that zone. So if I've got 3 days, I want to be in that flow state for 3 days and just loving it.
You're amazing, brother. Any last comments or words you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, and the last thing I think is I just invite everyone to have fun with this stuff, be open and approach the questions, the mental fitness without any judgment. And we're so damn hard on ourselves all the time for various reasons. Just go into this, no judgment, be open, explore, and see where it goes. But it's, if you can do that, I'm willing to bet you'll get some good benefit out of the experience.
Appreciate you, brother. You're a legend. Look forward to catching up soon.
Yeah, right back at you.
Hey everyone, and thank you so much for listening to the Resilient Minds. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please make sure to go comment and like and follow us on iTunes or Spotify, and please make sure that if you really love this, to share this episode, and make sure that you're inviting all your friends to like it as we continue to unfold what the beauty of our minds does. More importantly, how powerful our heart level of intelligence can be when we combine our heart and our brain together. And more importantly, make sure you take the time to take a look at what we're doing at Balanced Media Ventures and how we can actually really support you in doubling your impact, your income, and your influence, and how you can bring your life's greatest vision into your purpose and create it from that level of reality. Talk to you soon.